good afternoon, everybody, and welcome very much to the first of our National Association Councils summits, which we plan to hold on a regular basis from now on. This brings together our National Associations Councils, our wider members, and our overall biotechnology community, and we are delighted that you could join us today for this first event. Our target today is very much looking at building on biotechnology from vaccines to economic growth for Europe. And it's really about learning where we go now from the COVID response that we saw change the European landscape so much. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We have a 3-hour meeting today, but with a break in the middle, you will be really happy to hear. And we're really looking forward to a lot of contribution from the many delegates that we now have. We started today with 111 delegates, and we have already nearly 140 delegates by the time we start this meeting this afternoon. So I'm going to give you a short introduction and then get down to the main work of the day. Really, when we came to looking at what we might do with our National Associations Council, when I joined EuropaBio at the end of last year, we looked at the key priorities at national level that really make up how Europe functions as a whole economy as a whole. And we know from having worked in biotechnology for a long time that it's already a very significant economic contributor. And we find ourselves now at a really important point in our economic journey. COVID has really brought it home what we need to build and improve on within Europe. And COVID really highlighted the fragility of the global supply chain. What works very well on a sunny day doesn't work so well on a rainy day. And that's what we really found out in the last 15 or 16 months. So we're at a point now, having had to have very short-term changes in how we respond to the disease, to see how we actually build long-term opportunities for Europe's biotechnology sector for that. So the aim of today is to really try and understand how we learn from this to enable strong economic growth for Europe as it enters into a recovery phase, and really very much from a national perspective. So the questions today are really, how do we ensure that Europe's scientific base leads onto next generation industry, not only for Europe, but also worldwide, as we've seen technologies change radically in the last 12 to 15 months, and also it's reinforced the fact that can't do everything on your own. So where you go, you need to improve products and processes, transport and the global supply chain. It all needs to be improved and strengthened. Next slide, please. So in terms of the national role in delivering European biotechnology's economic performance, our National Associations Council really were one of the founding parts of EuropaBio 25 years ago. And it's a really important map of regional and national actors with, I think, 19 different organisations part of the council now. And we talk very much about Europe as a whole, but in fact, it's delivered by individual countries. And that's what our National Associations Council comes together to discuss or work out where there are common priorities and how we can work in a very well-aligned way. And as you will know, coming from all corners of Europe, there is a very diverse history in how different sectors have developed and how the biotechnology sector is developed. The sizes of countries are different, very different, both in terms of population, but also in economic size. They have a different historical development. They're science-based, and they have very different industry profiles, all of which biotechnology has to address. And so there is a very significant demand from the National Associations level is to how do we enable alignment for amplified outcomes where everybody can contribute and everybody can benefit. So the key question for today is, how does Europe enable this? This is not what we do as individuals, but what we do together. Next slide, please. So we have a super busy agenda for you today. Following my short introduction, we're going to move over to a very short video presentation from Manuel Heitor, the Minister of Science, Technology and Higher Education in Portugal. And it's this point at which I should say a big thank you to our friends and colleagues at PBio, who is the Portuguese Bioindustries Association, because this agenda and this meeting today is being brought to you as part of the Portuguese presidency of the European Council. And our national member in Portugal has worked really hard to help us pull this agenda together and bring a really diverse population together around the discussions that we are going to have. So following Manuel's short video recording, we will have if we go back to the previous slide, Martina, thank you. Following Manuel's presentation, we will have a really short presentation from me, just to set the scene in how Europe sits in terms of biotechnology, both from a sort of economic perspective and from a policy perspective. And then we will go on to our session 1, which looks at what the ecosystem in Europe looks like now and how COVID has affected it. And so for that, we will hear go back to Portugal and hear from PBio, but we will also hear from Elka and Sinan, from 2 of the major pharmaceutical companies that have really played a role within the COVID response. And Pfizer, of course, will be very familiar to everybody as one of the earliest pharma players in this particular pathway. After a short break, we will then come to the real working side of the meeting, where we look at how we build on this for the future. So we'll hear from 2 small companies that are really the next generation therapeutics that are going to come out, and they are going to tell us what they need to enable to deliver properly, before we then go to our National Associations Council panel and talk about how we progress and what our priorities should be. And so it's going to be a super busy day for everybody. If we can have our next slide, please, Martina. So, and you as an audience play a significant role today, and we're really thankful to have you here. As I said, we anticipated about 120 people. We now have nearly 140, so it's very exciting. We are recording the whole summit, and afterwards all the slides will be available, plus the recording to you. We're going to undertake polling throughout the meeting, throughout the panel discussion, so that you can add your contributions in. And this will all really help you build a really strong document that we would like to publish at the end of this process. You can also, as well as taking part in the polling, you can ask questions directly using the Q&A section of your screen on the right hand side, and you can also use the comments section to put in more generally available comments and questions to which other delegates can also respond. So we really encourage you very much to play a full role. If you've got something to say, please add it into the comments. If you've got a question for the panelists, please put it into the Q&A, and we will be delighted to include you as much as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Martina. And of course, don't forget to tell everybody that you're here. Please use LinkedIn and Twitter to keep everybody informed, because we've had a really great response online, and we will certainly continue this discussion with our wider social media community afterwards. So next slide, please. So I'm very pleased now to switch over to a short presentation from Manuel Heitor. And again, we're really thankful to the Portuguese government for including this meeting within their presidency calendar.
For European bio-entrepreneurs, I don't need to call your attention for the unprecedented times we live on, particularly in terms of the increasing relevance of biotechnology. But certainly, let me give a special address and acknowledgement to this idea to build an European network of the national associations, particularly representatives of the diversified arrangements of the biotechnology sector across Europe. We need to enrich that diversity, but certainly understand the opportunities for building networks. In the Portuguese case, APBio, the National Association for Bioindustries, has been particularly provocative, but also an inspiration for new entrepreneurs, for young entrepreneurs to exchange ideas and to build step by step a growing biotechnology industry, as well as addressing the funding issues, looking at investment funds worldwide, but also to address markets worldwide. And again, EuropaBio can be a game-changing in the overall European context, because more and more we need to understand the key role of fundamental science in articulation with the capacity to build and develop and commercialize disruptive products and systems. Certainly, if we have a vaccine today, in Europe and in the world is because we have been able, in a very short period of time, to combine scientific capacity at the most fundamental way with the capacity of entrepreneurs, of small startups, to articulate with the large capacity of more traditional firms to commercialize and distribute vaccines. But again, this complex articulation between those devoted to basic and fundamental science, particularly new frontiers of knowledge, with the capacity of those particularly devoted to the development and commercialization of disruptive products and systems, has been shown over the last years to be a real virtuous cycle that certainly we need to do more and more, certainly at national and regional level, but we all gain if EuropaBio builds more and more European networks of researchers, of entrepreneurs and firms, larger firms, better understanding this complexity of different type of stakeholders with different type of incentives and certainly with different socio-cultural contexts. But it is essentially through that network that we can provide a better world. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that video that was provided by the Portuguese presidency. Having known the biotechnology sector in Portugal since back in sort of the early 2000s, it's really great to see how it's growing and developing. So we're now going to move on to a very quick overview from myself just on how Europe sits within a sort of very competitive global landscape, because we know, of course, and everybody in this room knows that however Europe progresses itself, it does not do this in a vacuum. The rest of the world is also developing with it. So it's not only how well we perform ourselves, but how we perform in relation to the rest of the world. And as I've already said near the beginning of my presentation, we already know that biotechnology is a strong economic force. And as we really look to develop into our, particularly the green transition, we know that it can play many more roles. So, and it's also an ecosystem, because it's so complex, it's shaped by complex and diverse policies. Many core technologies, such as genome editing, for example, will sit across many different sectors and will be impacted by how those sectors respond and regulate it. And we find ourselves now at a point where very significant changes are being proposed and are underway. So it's extremely important that we help to have an aligned and strong pathway forwards so that all biotechnology can be implemented to its maximum potential. And this is not just maximum economic potential, it's also the societal impact that it can have. And again, we look both at the healthcare and the industrial biotechnology side of the equations for this. So we must, as I've already said, look and plan and implement our activities within a global context. So it has the maximum benefit for us, but also contributes to global progress using biotechnology. So next slide, please. To start with, we will look at biotechnology as an economic force. Some of you will be aware that last year we developed and published a report with the Whitehall Institute that showed that how economically diverse and deep biotechnology already is. So we published in 2020 the report measuring the economic footprint of the biotechnology industry in Europe, and we will share that with everybody at the end of today. And it was a really big job to do, because indicators for the economic performance of biotechnology are extremely difficult to find. It is not a standard product, and also you often find that when you look at an end product, there's no evidence of the biotechnology there. However, it will have been produced using biotechnology within its development pathway. So we developed with the Whitehall Institute a set of novel indicators that we could use to assess biotechnology over the long term. And when you look at biotechnology, it has already been an economic contributor for an extremely long time. I'm not going to go back as far as the examples you see when you talk about early brewing and early production of bread. I'm looking at how we developed it very strongly as a commercial product, particularly in the healthcare side, which is where it really started to develop as an economic concern. So if you look back all the way down to the 1970s, when human insulin was developed from engineered bacteria, for its final FDA approval in 1982, that was a real game changer in how biotechnology was used as an economic vehicle, as well as one that sort of evolved over many centuries of European civilization. And the starting point from 1982 with the insulin approval really started to grow until the late 1990s. We saw an absolute boom in global biotech investment. And that was where we really started to see some of the global clusters starting to develop. And even though we all know that biotechnology is very high risk, you don't see revenue from it for a very long time in terms of the final products, it has a profound impact on the economic landscape. It is a substantial employer, as anybody who has worked within a biotechnology cluster will be able to tell you. It contributes very significantly to the skills base within regions, within countries, and we've seen universities really develop with the sector as well in terms of how scientific skills are able to translate into industrial uptake. And with, of course, core product development comes specialist service sectors. We know that biotechnology is incredibly complex, and every single step of the pathway to produce a new product will essentially grow a specialist sector around it, be it formulation, clinical trials, transport. All of these things require very specialist skills. And of course, the service sector is a for-profit sector immediately. So you're already seeing how it develops economic benefit in multiple ways. And Europe has many major clusters now, which creates a gravitational pull for business and partnerships, so that they do end up playing a very significant role within lots of different countries in Europe. So next slide, please. And as I've already mentioned, there are direct effects of biotechnology as you're looking at, say, novel products development, and there are indirect effects. And we tried very hard to measure that within the study with Y4 as well. So the direct effects, where you would talk about, something linked to the direct development of a novel therapeutic or a novel diagnostic. But you then have the very significant effects that you have from the specialist service sectors that will support that, and the economic pathway it will follow through to its uptake within the market. And finally, we're now starting to measure the impact on European citizens as a direct result of access into advanced technologies such as biotechnology. A great example there is the immense progress made within rare diseases. Many more diseases can be treated to result in a higher quality of life and a much greater survival rate. And that all impacts on the economic performance of the people involved in that. So biotechnology has a very profound impact on economic performance within the countries where it's delivered. Next slide, please. And I just want to leave the economic side of this with having a look at some of the numbers from the Y4 report that we undertook. So we'll just take two simple examples. We'll look at gross added value and employment. So in 2018, we could say that the direct effect of biotechnology activities was a 34.5 billion euros, which is not a small sum of money. But once you added in the indirect effects, that took it all the way up to almost 80 billion euros. So you can see that it's a very significant source of economic activity within Europe. And the employment side of that follows exactly the same pattern. Biotech is often quite specialist. So particularly in smaller companies, you will have quite a small employment footprint, the economic size of the company. However, once you add on the indirect employment from all of those layers of services and the benefit to society in there, you reach almost 1 million jobs in 2018, directly or indirectly involved in the biotechnology sector. And I think the really important thing to take away from the commercial side of this is how quickly it is growing, because obviously all sectors have an economic footprint. But when you look at how quickly gross added value is growing, it was at 4.1% in 2018, which is over twice as fast as the overall economy. And you can see exactly the same for employment as well. So the growth since 2008 in employment within biotech is 2.6%. And when you look at the overall economy at 0.2%, 2% over the same period of time, you can see that this is an absolute boom sector. And so we really want to continue as we have started very strongly. And we hope very much that Europe, where Europe finds itself now, is the point at which we can really grow the sector now further. Next slide, please. So I'm looking very quickly now at the landscape and how it shapes competitiveness. And I've got this rather obvious picture of umbrellas on this slide, because everything that we do now is shaped under the umbrella of the green transition and the digital transition. So it doesn't matter what sector of biotechnology you're working in, questions we'll come back to is how do we either contribute to sustainability or how do we benefit from sustainability? And the digital transition is exactly the same. It's how do we make ourselves better through the transition to a much better use of digital resources that we have. So next slide, please. Of course, as with all things policy, it's complicated. And now in particular, it's very complicated. I mentioned earlier that we have there's a lot of changes taking place right now. And just this short list here will tell you where these things are. Right from the industrial biotech side, you have the Green Deal. You also have the new genome technologies paper that was published just last week. You have everything sits within the industrial strategy, I should also say, which is a very significant pathway from the European Commission. And on the healthcare side, you have a blizzard of new strategies and policies being developed, all of which are going to impact how biotechnology performs from an economic perspective, particularly in Europe. Take the next slide, please. So if we just start with a quick look at the industrial strategy, this underpins everything. And the European Commission, with an immense stroke of bad luck, introduced this in March 2020, literally the day before the World Health Organization declared COVID a global pandemic. So it's had a year to be battered around by COVID to say, what do we need to change? What has happened in Europe? And what do we need to now build beyond just a rather calm pathway forward? How do we need to change what we do, and what key critical things do we need to do? And this was very much linked to resilience of the medical supply chain, and it very much demonstrated how interdependent these global supply chains are, and that when something goes wrong, the results of that going wrong point out all the vulnerabilities and the fragilities in a global supply chain. So it was really interesting to see how the industrial strategy has been revised. And fortunately for us, it was just published again for us in the last week in a revised format. So it's brought in specific learnings, which we're very much looking forward to working with the Commission for. And indeed, EuropaBio sits within an expert forum to help implement the industrial strategy, which will be a really great opportunity for life sciences to make sure that it's positioned and contributes very strongly into all sectors, not just sectors that you would think are traditionally linked with biotechnology. Next slide, please. If we have a quick look at the industrial biotechnology side of the policy landscape, again, it's already super complex. And this all sits within the context of the European Green Deal. And you can see there's a lot of different strategies and a lot of different policy developments around this. You have the farm to fork strategy, you have biodiversity, you have the circular economy action plan, and all of these things will impact how industrial biotechnology can grow as a contributor towards Europe reaching its sustainable development goals and also building the economic foundation. And we're very happy to see the way that new genome editing is being looked at as a platform technology across lots of different applications. And this will be a very significant piece of legislative development, we hope. So next slide, please. On the healthcare side, as I said, there is a blizzard of things. And this was just literally a small set of the cut and pastes from the European Commission, different bits of its website as to what it's doing right now. And what we have within the healthcare side is you will often have pathways going forward that will affect the same thing in potentially lots of different ways. So we're looking at things like the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe. We're looking at orphan medicines. We're looking at digital health. We're looking at the development of HERA, which is very familiar to many people in this room. So what we need to do on this side is ensure with all of our members and our wider community that we really ensure that key aspects of healthcare biotechnology are enabled to go forward through, hopefully in a very aligned way, through all these different initiatives being developed. And I don't need to tell you how important things such as property are, given the sort of headline activities we've seen in the past few days over the proposed IP waiver in the US. So all of these things are super important, and every single one of those will affect biotechnology as we go forward. So next slide, please. So I am going to stop talking very soon. You'll be here to know. And so we're going to move on to the first of our speakers for this afternoon, and we're going to look at how we set the scene for biotechnology. So we'll go back to Portugal first with David Malta, and he's going to present on behalf of PBio that say where Portugal is now, where does it want to go, and what does it need to be able to do that? And that really sets the scene for our national focus in the panel discussion. And we're extremely glad to have both Novartis and Pfizer in the room with us today as well. They have a snapshot of not the technology pathways they have followed during the last 12 months, but how their partnerships have really been enabled, because we have seen changes in every aspect of vaccines development and sort of general biotech development to get things through to market faster than we have ever seen them before. And we want to understand what changed, what should we keep, what should we have more of. So we're really glad to hear from both Novartis and Pfizer today. In the next session, we will go forward to look at some of our next generation SMEs. So we start to take our learnings from now and go, how do we apply this into tomorrow's SMEs? And then we will move to our panel discussion to rewrite the world, say how we actually get there. So I'll have my next slide, please. So we move now officially into our session one, and I'm really glad to welcome David to the meeting, who is going to give us the initial insights from Portugal. So David, you would like to introduce yourself and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claire. Pleasure to be here today, speak to all of you. David, I'm part of the board of PBio in Portugal, also founder and CEO of Therapeutics, a small company, and a venture capital investor out of a Belgium-based fund, Vesalius Biocapital. So I think last year brought us, I think, an immense challenge that we all know and are aware, and I'm not going to repeat, but also an opportunity. And if we go forward to my first slide, PBio took that opportunity to challenge the government locally and decision makers in parties of the opposition to make a strategic bet. And before the pandemic came, when we talked about health and healthcare, the only conversation we could have was about hospitals, correct? So how do we treat disease? Are the waiting lists for surgeries growing or shrinking? Do we have the budget for the Ministry of Health on track? And no one made the link between having a robust healthcare system working and innovation. No one had made that link before, and the pandemic brought that to light. Brought that to light locally in Portugal, but I also think more globally and in Europe. And now I think we all recognize that biotech in its global sense is going to be key for the development of the continent, not only for its objectives on health, but its objectives on sustainability and on climate transition. A little bit more challenge for us to contribute as directly to the digital, but I think there are things we can do there. But at least in these three pillars of development, biotech has shown to play a key role. And the last year and so has demonstrated that not only it does play a key role, but it's up to the challenge and is able to respond. In fact, if we move to the next slide, it's really clear today that biotechnology is transversal in healthcare. That is clear now. We all knew here that we use it to diagnose, we use it to do data analysis and to compile, to be the data generation for epidemiologists. We all knew that we use it to develop drugs, vaccines, therapeutic approaches, advanced therapies, doesn't really matter. But we now are sure that the world also knows, right? We are now sure that everyone else that does not attend, participate in biotech day-to-day is aware that our sector is key for the development of a robust economic cluster around health, and more important than just looking at the economy, to impact the citizens, to provide citizens with good solutions to their problems. Another thing that was clear, and you can stay still on the previous slide for one more second, is that we don't need only academics, we don't need only startups, we don't only need large companies, correct? It was clear that to be effective here, we need to work synergistically across the value chain, from universities where breakthrough research is done to smaller innovative companies where you can do quicker the translation and quicker the early stage development, but importantly as well to the established large companies, as we see here, and we are going to for sure listen from Novartis and Pfizer after, that have the infrastructure and the capacity to do late stage development and commercialization and large scale production of the therapeutic solutions. And so actually we need to have an effective tech transfer structure that goes from A to Z, and we're able to do so. So at PBio, we actually came up with a proposal, and we can go to the next slide, to include biotechnology as a cornerstone of the strategy of the country for 2030. We were lucky in a certain point, because 2020 was a crucial year to a lot of European countries to define their strategies for a decade. It was the year of transition of the European cycle and negotiation of the new framework agreements for the upcoming 7 years. Also, Europe decided to put together a rescue program to make Europe more resilient. And so we took the chance and we advanced with a clear proposal. Two main axes: Portugal to be placed as a hub of R&D in Europe for biotechnology, for life sciences, and a strategic pillar for the production capacity in healthcare. And these are two things that are bets that would ensure that the continent and the country are more prepared to face new strategies, new crises, and new global healthcare challenges. We were successful in so much so that our government ended up adopting a significant part of our ideas into the Portuguese 2030 strategy. We can share with you that out of the 9 topics of the new economic growth development, 5 are on biotechnology, not only focused on healthcare, but also in sustainability, also a lot in the primary sector around food challenges. And so we were able to convince government that it should be a priority to invest in this field for the next decade. And how do we see this? If we go to the next slide, clear. We see this as I mentioned as a continuum. A first part focused on innovation, and there we need to look at Portugal and see what's missing, and I think that's the important part here. So in basic research, actually Portugal is very well positioned in life sciences. Typically in the OECD rankings, we are around 10, 11, 12th place in terms of productivity in life sciences. Portugal, unfortunately, is not on this place in the rankings in a lot of other areas, but in life sciences, we are actually very competitive. But I think we are missing a couple of instruments that we proposed, which are all basically coming down to having sustained funding of basic research, right? So independence from political cycles and program contracts, where we can use, for instance, VIB as a model, European model. The second part, which is probably the area where Portugal is less competitive, is in tech transfer and innovation. And here I think there are 2 major things that are missing in our country. Some that depend on ourselves only, some others that depend on convincing others to invest alongside. So the first one is experience in tech transfer. The country has not a lot of experience generically in tech transfer, and more particularly in this very specialized area. So we propose to create a supranational TTO. The scientific system is pretty much public in Portugal, so it would be fairly easy to concentrate tech transfer activity so that we could create a scale and a knowledge. And the second one, which is very surprising for me still, is that Portugal is one of the very few countries where there are no specialized life science venture capital investors. If we look pretty much to every other country, there is a pool of investors who only invest in this field, and they are specialized, and they are a backbone of the development of the ecosystem. So that some of you might not have the numbers at hand. But for instance, out of the drugs approved by FDA, more than half every year have been venture capital backed at some point in the development. So VC, specialized VC, plays a major role and is still absent in Portugal. And then associated with this, a set of rules for what we call deep tech companies. They can be, of course, life science, biotech companies, but they can be in other areas of development that create a set of incentives to localize these companies in Europe and in Portugal. And then all of this should follow naturally to industrial investments. And in industrial investments, I think Portugal is actually uniquely positioned. We have a surplus of qualified human resources, which are scarce in Europe. And so what we want really is to attract high added value manufacturing to the country. We actually went a step ahead and proposed that Europe, like the US, does some positive discrimination of its own companies with what we call an SME Business European Enhancement Act, by which a significant percentage, and by significance we can think about 10%, 15% of procurement by European states is actually done towards European companies as a positive discrimination act. And this is also a way to ensure that there is minimum volumes of purchases done in Europe to ensure that we can have local manufacturing for critical components. Of course, all of this in fair competition and making sure that the consumer is well satisfied in terms not only of quality but also of price. But we need to make sure that we retain some of the components, and we also that, for instance, in some of the basic components, there is virtually no manufacturing capacity in Europe, and when global distribution chains are affected, this becomes critical. So there needs to be a positive discrimination around buying. But then why Portugal? And we can move to the next slide. Of course, a lot of us here that represent our local associations have these types of slides. This is as important internally as it is important externally. But I think I highlighted here 7 topics of why we feel Portugal is actually an interesting place to do, and where a lot of European countries, a lot of European companies themselves could actually consider doing investments. So the first one I would say is that we do have an installed industrial capacity, both in drugs and in medical devices, and companies that are typically both FDA and EMA authorized. Second, which I put as important as the first, is there is scientific excellence in the field. And this is always the basis for anything which is done in biotechnology, correct? We all come from science. We start in science and we finish in products, and so we need scientific excellence to be able to have a robust cluster. Innovation is now a topic in the country for a long time, and so it's easier and easier actually to partner with universities and to make it simple and access innovation in an effective manner. The fourth is highly qualified human resources. I think Portugal made a bet more than 30 years ago to train scientists abroad to help mature the scientific ecosystem of the country. Those results are there, and that's partly why we are so well positioned in the OECD rankings. But even more recently, we started a series of partnerships with US schools to train our best that come back. So the talent pool is available, and we all know how difficult it is to attract and retain talent. And this talent has a particular characteristic, I would say, which is loyalty. Employees in Portugal tend to be loyal to their companies and stay for long tenures. And if, for instance, we look at what's happening in Silicon Valley, even in the life science area, the average tenure of someone in a company is 1 year and a half. So it's difficult to stabilize and maintain teams with a perspective of mid to long-term investment, and that does not happen in Portugal. And then looking at foreigners that want to invest in Portugal, being them completely external or also European parties that want to come down, quality of life is still a characteristic of Portugal. And I think all of us appreciate quality of life more and more after some of the lockdown periods that we've all lived after the last year. Portugal is still an affordable place to live, where people can buy houses, people can enjoy work-life balance. And then the last one is we are a natural Atlantic bridge. Not only we are the closest destination to the Americas from continental Europe, as we have natural ties to South America and Africa, which becomes more and more critical in terms of addressing global health issues, as we are seeing now, correct? Even if all of us in Europe get vaccinated in September or October, as some of the most positive people that are doing those analyses are thinking about, if we do not address the issues globally, we are not going to be able to surpass the pandemic as we all wish. And so Portugal is actually well positioned to do this Atlantic bridge, this triangle between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. To finish up, I would say that the objective is clear, correct? Is to develop a robust, knowledge-based economic cluster to serve Portugal and Europe, with the objective of serving the society. I think Claire and the study that EuropaBio has done, and ourselves in PBio have conducted one locally as well, have been able to demonstrate that if we do this bet, we can actually achieve a sustainable economic development with quality of jobs and economic impact. And it's clear for all of us that if we don't do this bet, we are not going to be able to overcome the types of issues that we faced in the last months, more a year now. And so this is fundamental for not only our country, but also for the continent to be resilient. Thank you so much for your attention today.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And I think it was really great to already see these aspects that are very unique to Portugal. So you highlighted the lack of domestic private investment, and that's not only just the access to money, but I'm presuming also access to the investment skills that come with those kind of funds.
Exactly, Claire. So it's not only a question of capital, it's a question of smart capital, correct? People that understand the type of business that can help the companies grow and scale and can open doors to partnerships. It's not only a question of having money. Money always helps, correct? But it's a question of having the type of money and the type of experience that allows a company to mature towards the right point. I would even dare to say that it's also a question of accessing grants, both locally and in Europe. We still see that for countries like Portugal, where VC is scarce, there is a funding gap. If we talk about a therapeutics company to get to IND ready status, and some of the local grant incentives that are based on European structural funds actually have weird limitations that make it difficult to be able to use in biotechnology, that we all know they are still there for decades now, and that's another challenge that we need to face.
Yeah, indeed, that's the first challenge that we will face in our panel discussion this afternoon, because all paths lead to money eventually. But I think it's really great oversight, because also you mentioned the manufacturing capacity as well, and that is something we've seen in the last 12 months, that this kind of capacity cannot be switched on over a short period of time. And I always use Belgium as a good example for this, in that, you know, when I first came to Belgium 12 years ago, it had already been investing in the long term in the sort of production capability for biological materials. And, you know, it's an expensive game. There's no doubt about that. And now you see where Belgium sits in the vaccine production scale, where that kind of investment pays off. But the fact you need sort of 15 years of investment to be a sort of global level. So it's not something that you do overnight. And I think that's something that we will address later in the panel discussion. So thank you very much indeed David. It was extremely appreciated, and I'm sure we will have you back later as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
To our next slide now, please, Martina. I am extremely pleased to welcome the first of our pharmaceutical presentations, well, not presentations, discussions this afternoon. I welcome Elke Burton to the floor, who is Head of EU Relations with Novartis. And Elke is we're going to have just a short conversation about what brought Novartis into the vaccine manufacturing pipeline and how it impacted, the decisions that drove that growth into vaccine production. So I'm going to ask Elke to introduce herself while we switch off the slide so we can see you properly. Elke. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Claire. And first of all, let me congratulate you and EuropaBio as well as PBio for organizing this very interesting discussion, which is very timely. And thank you for inviting me and share our experience as Novartis. So I'm heading the Brussels office for Novartis, so basically representing Novartis towards the European institutions and stakeholders. And as you might know, Novartis actually a pharmaceutical company. Our purpose is to reimagine medicine. And we are actually in Europe market leader, both in innovative medicines as well as in biosimilar and generic medicines. We have a huge footprint worldwide in supply and manufacturing, as well as in R&D. And actually, it's very exciting because most of our footprint in manufacturing is actually situated in Europe.
Which is very happy. I just want to have a quick point on format for all delegates, in case you would like to look at Elke, big, in your layout little button towards the right-hand side of your screen. You can select show participants without video if you want. If you make sure that is not ticked, you will see whoever is speaking and has their video on much bigger, which I think is better for everybody. So I will ask you our first question, Elke. It's like, Novartis is not normally involved in vaccine development. So what drove your decision to get involved?
Yeah, so first of all, maybe since the beginning of the pandemic, as Novartis, we have been guided by two principles. So the first is to ensure the safety of our associates, especially those working in the production side, because they are not able to telework like most of us. And then also to ensure that patients actually have a continued access to the medicines that they need. This has required us to put in place some significant measures at our sites, like risk management plans, as well as business continuity plans, to protect the health and well-being of our employees, as well as keeping our facilities open and operational. And so I'm proud to actually say to you that we were able to continue to supply medicines at normal level for the last 15 months, despite the unprecedented challenges that COVID brought, and to maintain actually our reliable supply. As David mentioned, COVID has not only been a stress test for healthcare systems across the globe, but also for pharmaceutical producers. So if you look at our role as Novartis, and we take it very serious as a responsible partner towards healthcare systems, and we chose very quickly to actually have an active role in this global fight against COVID-19. And beyond our already existing commitments, we put in place some extra efforts, like, for example, repurposing some of our packaging lines to the production of vials for test kits, also producing large quantities of disinfectants for communities where we actually operate. Our Sandoz division actually was the first company in, I would say, a year ago to commit to keep prices stable for a basket of essential medicines that are used for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. And on top of that, we made a basket of 15 medicines available for low and middle income countries at no profit, medicines that are used to treat the symptoms of COVID-19. Now, as you mentioned, with the approval of several COVID-19 vaccines, there is, of course, a growing hope that the world might come out of this situation with the delivery of vaccines. And Novartis decided to leverage our technical expertise and our state-of-the-art facilities to contribute to this effort. So there are a lot of challenges in the vaccine rollout, and I'm sure that my colleague from Pfizer can also elaborate on this. But one of them is, of course, the bottleneck in manufacturing. And we have observed an unprecedented level of collaboration within the pharmaceutical industry and with policymakers, where actually the pharmaceutical industry has been able to boost their collective innovation power and also their manufacturing footprint in order to supply the vaccines. At Novartis, we're not, as you mentioned, in vaccines business anymore, but we do have a large and diverse manufacturing network. And that's why we were very committed to enter into agreements with different manufacturers of mRNA-based vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, as well as CureVac, and to actually help them with the production through our facilities in Stein, in Switzerland, as well as in Kundl, Austria, to help improve the access of people around the world to the vaccines.
Thanks, and I think that's a really nice point you make. It highlights the complexity and the multifaceted aspect of production, because you talked about packaging and things like this. It's not just the biological materials that are so critical and that we have found lacking. The lack of any one thing is a bottleneck to final vaccine production. So what is you've announced partnerships with both CureVac and BioNTech. So what will your role be exactly with each of those companies?
Yeah, actually, through our network, our biotech network within Novartis, we're able to support in the different stages of manufacturing the COVID-19 vaccines. And for example, our agreement with BioNTech Pfizer, we take bulk active substance from them and we fill it into vials in our facility in Stein in Switzerland. And then we ship it back to BioNTech, who then distributes it to healthcare systems around the world. For CureVac, our agreement that we signed in March is actually to produce the mRNA and the bulk drug product, which we then deliver back to CureVac, and they do the further processing and also the filling. This specific activity on mRNA starting materials and bulk drug products is done in Austria in a new high-tech production facility that was actually already under production for the under construction, sorry, for the production of gene therapies. On top of that, we also announced recently our collaboration with Roche, as Roche has a very promising clinical development for one of the COVID-19 treatments coming. And under this agreement, we will basically produce the drug substance, so the active substance for Roche.
Very interesting as well, because you said you had Swiss facilities coming online in response to sort of cell and gene therapy. I think it shows how important it is to keep advancing manufacturing capability, because it's more ready to switch into different applications, as we have seen with the vaccines capability. That's a super interesting thing. So what was your strategic rationale behind these partnerships that you have with these small companies, and indeed companies like Roche?
First of all of us have seen how speedy this R&D in vaccines has been. It has never been seen before. But vaccinating the whole world is, of course, a huge task. And you have to know that actually vaccine manufacturers are scaling up from 0 to billions of doses, especially in these mRNA vaccines, which didn't exist before. And just to name one figure, but pre-COVID, the overall vaccine production worldwide was estimated around 5 billion doses for all vaccines. And now in 2021, only the production of COVID-19 vaccines is estimated to reach almost 10 billion. So it's already double. As you also mentioned before, this vaccines manufacturing is very complex, and you need cutting-edge science and also technology to basically be able to do this. So as Novartis, we have what we have done is we have reallocated our manufacturing capacity, making sure that we can step in on a voluntary basis. We're performing together with the two partners the tech transfer, and this is going really well. And all this while we also guarantee the continuation of supply of our other treatments in biotech.
Oh, that's great. I'm seeing a comment that my audio is breaking up sometimes, so I'll lean in to the microphone and then go and get my headphones after the next one. So that really brings me to my final question is, within Europe, there's a great deal of debate around manufacturing supply, and particularly around vaccines and other advanced materials. In your view, and it's very relevant to the meeting today, how can we accelerate this both in the EU and worldwide?
So first of all, I would say, Claire, that we have seen with COVID-19 an unprecedented collaboration. And in my view, governments and industry need to continue to work together to basically bring these vaccines rapidly to patients. This requires addressing, but also eliminating some of the regulatory approval delays. We have seen, especially in the beginning of COVID-19, we have seen some barriers for our supply chain, like export bans, and we were very pleased to see that the collaboration with the European institutions and national authorities have helped us to lift these export bans. We have also observed at a certain moment excessive stockpiling of some medicines, and we were again pleased to see that actually the European institutions have worked on guidelines to avoid this stockpiling, because at the end of the day, we don't need medicines to be somewhere in a warehouse in a country. We need these medicines to reach the patients that are in need. And then this brings me to another point, is that, as said before, vaccines manufacturing is a global process. There are many intermediates, many components that come from across the globe. And we need to work together to make sure that this global process goes smoothly and to avoid any nationalistic approach to it. And then maybe a last point is on these export restrictions. It's important for the COVID-19 manufacturing and also distribution not to risk any delays by export restrictions. We need the whole network to operate. And last but not least, we need, as was said by David, also a good investment climate in Europe to build on a robust and a predictable intellectual property and regulatory framework to actually guarantee investments also towards the future.
Thank you very much indeed, Elke. And that touches on many of the points we will have in the panel discussion later. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I'm sure that we can send questions forward to you later in the afternoon. So I'm now going to ask Martina to put the slide on for our next speaker, if possible, because I'm very pleased to announce our next pharmaceutical speaker, who is Sinan from Pfizer. And of course, you will all be familiar with the sort of Pfizer-BioNTech relationship, which has been probably the highest profile one since the beginning. And it's really interesting to look at this from a slightly different perspective, where we're not looking at just creating manufacturing partnerships with this is the whole development and production partnership, a really end-to-end partnership. So again, we'll take the slide down and Sinan can take the floor and give us his insights into Pfizer's work here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. First to check, can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Oh, very good. So first of all, thank you very much for EuropaBio to include me to share our journey with BioNTech. And I call it You call it a global journey. I called it a journey of a dream to make it happen, because when this crisis started and WHO declared it as a pandemic, it was March last year. And right now, more than maybe 14 months after that, many people are getting vaccinated, both in Europe and out of Europe, with a vaccine that was developed by a European biotech and that has been commercialized together with us as Pfizer. So it's really a dream come true, and shows the power of biotechs and a good, solid collaboration with a big pharma company. And I think that formula for success is key to make it happen. And some really facts to be amazed by. So as of now, we are shipping our vaccine to 91 countries across the world. So far, we have been able to ship 430 million doses of our vaccine to these 91 countries. And for the year of 2021, we hope to ship a total of 2.5 billion doses. So sometimes these numbers are easy to pronounce, but they are very hard to realize, because just as a comparison, as Pfizer, and we consider ourselves one of the important and leading vaccine manufacturers, vaccine companies, our annual output is around 212 million doses, except the COVID-19 vaccine. So even as a leading vaccine manufacturer, we needed to up our game by 12 times to address the need. So really a huge collaboration between a European biotech company and a big pharma company to make this happen. And I think when I look at the journey, it first and foremost starts with a success story, again, of the European biotech company, because it's their proprietary technology. And it's a success story. On the other side, it would have been very difficult for BioNTech to be successful without a partner like Pfizer, which is an end-to-end vaccines company. And I think this is very, very important. It shouldn't be only the partner who is big, maybe who has the outreach footprint, etc., but finding the specific partner who has the end-to-end technology in vaccines is very important. And I will touch upon it later in the journey, why it mattered and when it mattered. So that's one part of the collaboration. And for me, one of the key parts is how we got from the get-go, from the start. And that is also interesting, because our partnership with BioNTech didn't start for COVID-19. It started in 2018, 2 years before the pandemic started, to develop a flu vaccine using an mRNA technology. So we already knew each other, and I think that was a key success factor. And I think it highlights and emphasizes the importance of early R&D collaboration, and not just late-stage collaboration. Of course, our COVID-19 vaccine is a different one, but our collaboration in the flu provided the relationships, the necessary, confidentiality agreements, like the legal requirements. But for me, most importantly, the trust between the organizations. And that trust propelled us to really head the pandemic head on. And our scientists starts collaborating very, very quickly, without any barriers, without any biases, because they trusted each other and the companies knew each other. So on the other side, when we started this journey, I think it was also important that the companies agreed on some principles and aligned on these principles to move it quickly. One of them was investment at risk. And I think maybe we learned it from our biotech partner. but they even by themselves could not find the necessary funds to bet on such a big project. So Pfizer has invested billions of dollars in this project without knowing that we can even register the product or successfully scale up the manufacturing. So that was critical in this journey to really have this investment at risk mentality. And of course, it is driven by the incentives that is provided by the intellectual property and patent systems that we can get the return of the investment at risk that we are doing. And also, our CEO mentioned it publicly that we didn't want public funding as Pfizer, because public funding at such a crisis might be counterproductive, because then we need to provide reports where we are spending this funding. We need to answer questions where we are spending. So it might be bureaucratic and it might be slowing down. In an ideal world, in a free market economy where our investment at risk is rewarded by intellectual property and patents, we think is the ideal way to move forward in such a crisis. And I think one alignment between the companies that was also key was the culture. So the cultural fit between the two companies. And Pfizer is also in a transformation, and our purposes are very similar with biotech. Our purpose at Pfizer is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. And all of our decisions were driven by this culture, which was very, very similar with biotech as a partner. So that fit in terms of early collaboration, that mentality of investment at risk, and the commonality of purposes and the culture really make that trust happen. And then our journey started on a very, very strong footprint. So usually, as everybody knows, developing a vaccine takes 10 to 15 years, and we needed to do it in 1 year. And one thing that we also followed maybe from the biotechs is how we develop our product. Rather than doing it sequentially, phase 1, then phase 2, then phase 3, and then regulatory manufacturing at scale, we did things in parallel. And that means taking risk, because you don't know when you are starting another phase whether you will be successful or whether you need to modify. So that was, I think, the nimbleness that we also learned from our biotech partner. And during the journey, also our end-to-end capabilities became very important, because we know how to develop a vaccine. We know the researchers. We know the clinical trial sites. We know how to manufacture. We know how to scale up. One example is our vaccine required certain temperatures to be transported. And there was a question also in the media whether it will be feasible to have a vaccine that needs to be stored and transported at -70 degrees. But with our expertise of our technical engineering scientists teams, and also with our relationship with vendors, distributors, and our footprint across the world, we were able to find solutions, such as shipping them in dry ice, such as using special soft boxes, and certain distributors and vendors. And we are operating in a just-in-time inventory, and we are shipping directly to points of use. So in a given country, if there are 250 points of use, we are shipping to them directly. So these innovations come, of course, from our teams, but also from our company's heritage and culture, that we are an end-to-end company, and not just only a big pharma, but focused on vaccines. And I think our biotech partner is also learning from us on how to scale that up. As the previous speaker mentioned, we have multiple manufacturing agreements across our global supply chain, including also Novartis, our other European partners such as Sanofi, etc. And they also expanded their manufacturing scope by employing these outsourced manufacturing opportunities, but also establishing their own manufacturing footprint. They now have received approval for a factory in Marburg in Germany, and they are looking for further manufacturing partners. So it's a very interesting relationship that we are also learning from each other. And right now, when we come to today, I said that we are shipping to 91 countries, and most of them also include COVAX, countries from COVAX that we have signed an agreement with. So that also shows again how the culture is fitting, and we are agreeing on our strategies to reach more and more countries and bring our vaccine to more and more people. And when we look to the future, of course, there is a highly uncertain future. We don't know, and science will tell us how the post-pandemic transition will continue. So far, our vaccines seem to be effective against certain variants, but we don't know. Maybe in the future there might be a variant that vaccines are not effective, and then our mRNA platform is very well suited to develop another vaccine in a much shorter time frame versus other platforms. And there, I think the important part when we look at the policy and the framework is really to have the right speed when it comes to regulatory systems, and also a body that really monitors all the variants, checks the effectiveness, and gives certain guidance which variants needs to be the target, and more importantly, the same incentive system, the intellectual property rights and the patent system, which really makes investment at risk attractive for all the companies across the globe. Because we don't know, right? So when we look at this pandemic, I think one lesson that it has taught the world is we don't know who will be successful against the race. And if we move forward with another crisis, whether it's a pandemic or another health crisis, we don't know who will have the next mRNA or the next technology. So we should form an environment with the right incentives so that the next company, the next BioNTechs are there to grow, to flourish, and really to help humanity fight this pandemic. So with that, I would like to end my speech summarizing the journey that we had in as little as I can, and really thank EuropaBio to give me this opportunity.
No, thank you. That's really nice, because when we started this process, we thought a list of things that you would specifically like to see, and it was really nice to see it come down to trusted relationships, the ability to work, to take risks, knowing that you're all working in it together. There's a lot of fundamental things that we overlook that need to also be there. And so I would like to ask you just a really quick question: is what has Pfizer learned about itself in that time and its relationship with BioNTech that it would like to continue in the future? Because everybody is changing. So what do you think has changed about Pfizer's approach that it will continue?
I think, so it's like married couples, right? So even if you are not the same, you adapt to the marriage and then you learn from each other. So that's how I see it. And when I look at what has changed in Pfizer is how to work like a biotech. And it starts from the CEO. It's really amazing. So he calls the meetings light speed, the meetings that we do. And we really try to take decisions very, very quickly. And when I compare, because I'm a 20-year-old Pfizer veteran in a way, when I compare it with the previous speed of decisions, it's really, really different. And as he announced in the last earnings call, we decided to invest in mRNA technology outside of COVID. And we just approved investments at a large scale. So previously, there would be a lot of discussions: how much should we invest, where should we take it from, etc., etc. Right now, I think we are changing in a way. Even the manufacturing investments to go from 1 billion to 2 billion and now to 2.5 billion. So these decisions would have taken much longer in the older Pfizer, and I think we are learning from our partner BioNTech in that sense.
No, that's really nice. So having worked in startup biotech and SME biotech for a lot of my career, you rapidly see that successful entrepreneurs in biotech are essentially insane optimists, because they make decisions that nobody would make if you put it down on paper, and yet they will keep relentlessly doing that. And the results are what you see with the mRNA vaccines, and it shows that you should never stop investing, even if you don't know where that technology is going to end up. I think that's really important for Europe, and it's already really well positioned in terms of depth of research base to enable it to continue doing that, because it's not a cheap thing to start, and if you don't have it, it's virtually impossible to begin. But so thank you very much, Sinan. We have a few questions, but we'll save those for perhaps using in the panel discussion later. So I would like to thank you very much indeed again. And it is now time for us to take a short break so everybody can take a rest and digest what we have listened to over the last, I think, 75 minutes. And we will come back at 4:30 exactly. And thank you very much for being with us so far. Thank you.
So welcome back, everybody. I hope you are well fueled with whatever beverage you needed to take and whatever snacks you needed to get you through to the end of the session today. I hope you can hear me better now with my headphones on. And I'm really happy to go into our second session for the afternoon, where we really get everybody to do a lot of work, which will be very good. So, and that includes you guys as delegates, as well as our speakers and panel members. So we're going to move straight to the next sort of intro section to our panel discussion, which is really bringing on two of the small companies that typically make up the landscape of biotechnology in Europe, and look at what they're doing and where they need to get to and how Europe helps them get there. And that will really help us position ourselves for the panel discussion coming. So our first speaker is Bruno Santos from Immuntep. So I would like you to introduce yourself, Bruno, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Hello, Claire. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Bruno Santos. My background is on biological engineering, and later on dedicated more to the management part through an MBA. And I'm the co-founder and CEO for Immuntep, a company that was created in 2014 that I will talk about during my presentation. So if you can move to the first slide. Today I will give the perspective of Immuntep in the future of vaccines and how we are developing the vaccines ourselves. So on the first slide, the most important part of our team, that is, it's our team that covers all the areas from the non-clinical to all the clinical trials, covering the scientific side, the production side, a lot of specialities within the research group, as well as the medical and regulatory parts that are essential for the work that we do. On the next slide. Talking about Immuntep, we were created in 2014 due to the discovery of a new mechanism that is shared by different bacteria. So instead of looking at the infections as we have to kill this bug, we looked at our immune system and see why our immune system is not able to control some kind of infection. And with that, we were able to discover a new mechanism of action. This mechanism is able to let the bacteria be able to shut down our immune system by excreting a protein. And this is why we are not able to vaccinate for some bacteria known for their resistance to antibiotics and their recurrent infections. Because of this ability that they have to shut down our immune system. By targeting this common virulence mechanism, we are able to create a new vaccine that has a wider approach. So on the next slide, we can see that with only one product, we are able to protect from 5 different bacteria, Klebsiella pneumonia, E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pneumonia, and Streptococcus galactia. They are all covered by our vaccine that we call PNV, for Paragon Novel Vaccine. On the next slide, we can see that this vaccine is ready to first in man. We already finished with good efficacy and toxicity results in preclinical, and it's unique in terms of its ability to address multiple bacteria, because not targeting one bacteria by itself, but targeting the virulence mechanism that is common to all of them. Again, for the same reason, we are able to cover all the serotypes of these bacteria, and due to the way that we created the product, we have the stability at high temperatures. So very important qualities in terms of a vaccine comparing to what it is in the market. And as we can see on the next slide, for the 5 bacteria that we are addressing, 4 of them don't have any product on the market, only pneumococcus as vaccines on the market. But again, they are limited to some serotypes of these bacteria, and with our approach, we could also target this market. Now, moving to more recently, the SARS-CoV pandemic. When we looked at this approach, and due to the fact that we saw that the people that were that had the virus, they got raised antibodies and they were protected against reinfection. We start seeing that the better approach for this virus would be to have something that could help us prevent other infections using mainly the whole inactivated virus, so that we can maximize the B and T cell epitopes and keep a good pattern of glycosylation to get a good recognition of the virus. Of course, we added an adjuvant that could support and reinforce the immune response, the antiviral response. And we added a new thing, that is the way of administration. As we are talking about a respiratory virus, by administering the vaccine directly into the lungs, that would create the major protection within the lungs. That's where the virus enters, and have the antibodies there where they are most needed. So on the next slide, we can see that's by looking at the different approaches that we had to follow for this particular virus, we thought that the inactivated virus would be the best one, due to this capability of addressing multiple variants that we are seeing more and more, the importance of it, because we are seeing that these new variants are emerging when we have the virus free to multiply. So on the next slide, at this point, our SARS-CoV-2 vaccine is undergoing the preclinical studies. It will be ready for the first in man by July 2021, and so far we are having very good efficacy and toxicity data. Again, one of the advantages to have the multiple variants coverage. The administration that doesn't require a health professional. So this was also a very important topic, because we had to consider that this vaccine should get to all over the world. So we shouldn't focus only on developing world. We should focus on getting the vaccine to each point of the globe. And that was also part of the decision why we decided to have this different way of administration that is easier to distribute as well, due to not requiring a cold chain, or at least a minus cold chain. So these are the products that we are developing as ImmuneTap, and looking at the challenges that we have ahead. Next slide, please. We can see that for ImmuneTap, as we are developing vaccines that have new approaches to what is on the market, we see that regulatory challenges are our major concern. So on one hand, on one of the vaccines, we have a new mechanism of action. So that requires a whole new approach from the regulatory entities. On the other hand, on the other vaccine, we have a new administration route as well that would require a major challenge from the regulatory entities. Both of them would be important for us to have a faster approval to get or to be able to establish biocorrelates of protection. So that would be the key to get these innovative vaccines to the market, and that as well as new endpoints of efficacy to confirm in the market. A little bit of what we saw in the first SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. They were approved with very low information, but they added the information that it was safe as a starting point to check or to verify the capability of being effective in the market. So that is also a challenge when we are introducing new ways, new vaccines in the market. On the other hand, we also have a major challenge related to the way that vaccines are looked at. Now a little bit different with the pandemic. I think it's more clear the impact that not having a vaccine has. But pharmaceutical companies usually look at a solution, a preventive solution that is just a one-time sale as less profitable than a treatment where you have recurrent revenues. So this is a huge challenge for us, and it's been a huge challenge for us. And for that, we feel like a part of public and private investment is key. So that these innovative products like our vaccines are able to enter the market, and the ability to attract this public investment will be key to do that. Just to finish, I would like just to refer in terms of on the next slide, in terms of the global vaccine development challenges that we face. We always try to think of a vaccine that has a wider coverage. It has the ability to cover multiple pathogens, multiple variants, focus on the population, as I mentioned. If we focus on developing a product that only is able to address some part of the population, may be a problem, as for example in SARS-CoV-2. The global approach, it should be think as a worldwide solution from the start. And of course, the ways to expose the antigen, that's where we can innovate and improve what we have currently on the market. And as we did in our first vaccine, the ability to look at other perspectives in terms of infectious disease that, for example, in our case, allow us to use like immunotherapies for bacterial infections and not focusing only on destroying the bacteria on itself. So these are the vaccine development challenges that we face, and the specific difficulties that we faced as a startup. And I'm ready for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much indeed. That was an amazingly good 10-minute tour of your technologies and some of the challenges. So thank you very much. So it's really interesting to me that you point to the regulatory pathway as probably the greatest challenge that you have, and we're definitely going to talk about that in the panel discussion, where we talk about agility and skills based inside regulatory systems, both at national and European level, so that it is able to move more quickly in response to novel technologies, especially where you're changing more than one parameter on a therapeutic that they would be considering to rule as safe. And I also really liked the idea around, the risk taking. You're talking about challenging bacteria as well. And obviously, non-traditional approaches to bacterial management are very much needed, but it's part of the problem that we've seen in that we're not seeing a lot of non-traditional, this is a new antibiotic candidate coming forward. So I'm hoping very much that COVID will allow the slightly more risk-taking approach, both in the large pharmaceutical companies, but also in investors as well, to enable more things to go forward. Because, as we have seen in COVID, the rewards can be very significant. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Bruno. And if you're hanging around to the end, that's great, because we may have questions later during the panel discussion. But I'm thinking to say I think I might end by asking you one more question. It's like, if you could change one thing within the European framework for development of products such as yours, what would it be?
So in this case, I would focus on the faster regulatory path. So I think the feedback can be much faster, as we are seeing in COVID, and also the ability to move forward. And in case of vaccines, that is key, with less data, of course, guaranteeing always the data in terms of safety, of course, but be able to move to new phases with less data in terms of efficacy and confirm that on the market, as we did with the COVID vaccine. I think that would be key. For example, in bacteria field, we would have more more innovations getting to the market, because we see that most of the vaccines that get on the market, they all go there by the correlates of protection. So basically following the same route as the ones that followed before, and by doing that, they will expend much less money on putting the product on the market, but they don't have any innovation, or they have very little innovation, adding one or other serotype, and that won't be so good for the public as a whole.
No, that's lovely, thank you. And I think that's a really good point that we will take through into the panel discussion. So I say thank you very much indeed for your super fast presentation. And I will move to our next presenter, Kim from Union Therapeutics, who are in fact a EuropaBio member, I am delighted to say. And this is another small company looking at the key bottlenecks in how they need to progress through to market. So Kim, if you would like to switch on your camera and say hello to everybody, that would be excellent.
Thank you for the invitation, Claire. Glad to be able to present Union Therapeutics to us, and let's dive right into it. I'm Kim Kurla, the CEO of Union Therapeutics. And if we move to the next slide, we are a small biotech company situated in Copenhagen, Denmark, and have a very strong team with seasoned pharmaceutical executives that, and we calculated that the other day, between us have actually been developing and putting more than 15 drugs onto the global market. We have received funds from the European Investment Bank, but are largely supported by private Danish investors. And in this February, we're able to raise more than 20 million euros from the private investor base to pursue programs within COVID-19. And if we take a little bit a look on the next slide of where we are in the current pandemic, I think it's fair to say that vaccines and the speed with which we have been able to take those forward have been absolutely outstanding. And also listening into the new ways of collaborating that we heard from between Pfizer and Biotech, but certainly also how Novartis have put at place their production capacity to help out, I think is really truly unique. And I think we need that because we also have to realize that we are likely to need more than vaccines themselves, and this is where new treatment opportunities come into play. I think one of the things that we already recognize by now is that with new mutants coming on, whether it's the South African one or the 1617 from India, they may possess some challenges in terms of breakthrough infections, even though we have a vaccinated population. And we know for some of the vaccines that they have a very poor effect, not least against the South African variant of concern. But that's basically only one point of the coin that treatments can help solve. The other one is perhaps a little bit overlooked, and this is what we call the vulnerable patient groups. And particularly we can look at two major patient groups here. One of people with very severe end-stage renal disease. They are a patient that in the first wave of COVID-19 actually had a mortality, as per the UK registry, of up towards 27%. So high morbidity and high mortality to COVID-19. Unfortunately, this is also a patient group with a compromised immune system, meaning that the protection from vaccines is less than optimal, and certainly less than us on the call here, or at least most of us on the call here. So clearly a patient population in need of something in addition to vaccines. Another major group to highlight here are cancer patients, not least patients with leukemia, which also have a not very robust response to vaccination. So basically seroconversion is not as it is for the rest of us. Now, what do we work on in Union? If we take the next one, is basically you can say an old and well-known molecule that was originally developed for helminthing infections in the gut. Now, in March of last year, the Pasteur Institute in Seoul identified niclosamide as being 40 times more potent than remdesivir against SARS-CoV-2. And in that time, we've been able to bring forward a solution that we have paired up with both a nasal spray and a nebulizer that you've seen here. We have taken it through phase 1, and in November was selected for 2 platform studies in the UK. So a very, very fast execution from idea into solution. Niclosamide is a completely different way of addressing viruses, and actually it has a general antiviral effect. So as many of you probably know, viruses cannot survive on their own. They need to go into the human cell and basically take over our production apparatus in order to create new virus particles. And this is basically what niclosamide prohibits, that it can't really get into our cells and take over our production capacity. So it keeps it out of the effective loop. So what we are working with now, and we have just recently tested it against the South African variant and the UK variant, and found that the potency is completely intact, as you would expect, as this is a general antiviral effect. So now it's all about progressing 3 clinical studies, 2 based with the nasal spray, 1 to protect kidney patients from being infected, and another study to provide early treatment for patients that are either asymptomatic or have mild symptoms upon testing positive for SARS-CoV-2. And finally, a study to test hospitalized patients where we combine both the nasal spray and the nebulizer. And as Bruno just alluded to, this is basically to bring the medicine to the organ where we have the virus infection. Now, if we look to the next slide at what has happened during COVID here, I think one thing that is quite clear is the essence of time. We need to move fast and come with good solutions as, for instance, mutants come in. What are the other opportunities that we have? And here is, of course, where we see treatment with niclosamide as a major opportunity. There are certainly also, as we have seen, challenges to supply chain. It is costly and time-consuming to set up a well-functioning supply chain, obviously for vaccines, but certainly also for something like niclosamide, which is a combination of active compound together with aseptic filling and then combining with nasal spray and nebulizer. So clearly something to focus in on. How do we solve these challenges? And I think it is important for us to mention that our investors have provided funds for us to do the clinical studies and show the proof of concept, and even in terms of the PROTECT study that we're participating in kidney patient, also serve as a registration study. This investors, we can attract investors to. However, the challenge in putting together at risk, and you can say before we have a clinical proof of concept to invest in a supply chain is not something that is easy to find investors for. And this is where basically public funding comes into place. And if we take the next slide, so I think we very much purport and really would like to recognize the European Commission to put forward a strategy for therapeutics in addition to the existing vaccine strategy. We do believe that this is super important, and to basically learn from what has worked well in and about vaccines. And one of the things that we clearly see as having worked extremely well is the usage of advanced purchase agreements that have actually enabled vaccines producers to build production capacity before actually having the clinical results. And I do see that as something that is immensely important for a small company such as Union Therapeutics also, in order for us to be able to not just supply for vulnerable patients when we have clinical proof of concept early next year to be ready to support that, but certainly also in light of oncoming mutations to hopefully be able to also help us keep society open when they start impacting on vaccine efficacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for another incredibly concise but targeted presentation. And there are lots of really interesting things that we talked about while we were even preparing for this meeting, in that this might be a product that is not going to find its way into the pharmaceutical development chain, but is something that a small company will have to take to the market, which brings its own set of challenges for what you need to achieve. You haven't got a Pfizer to go and talk to, because this is not something that they are going to do.
True.
And I liked the comment as well around the timing of the financing as well, because obviously if you have advanced purchase agreements, the money is, if you have been contracted to supply the drug, the money is coming. It's just when the finance enables you to then produce it. So it's not about spending more money. It's about where the money appears in the supply chain development.
No, absolutely correct, Claire. It's the ability to move forward your investment into production and supply chain. So once you have the positive data, and with the very fast approval that EMA is actually putting in place, to then be able to also support the patient in needs.
No, I think that's really great. Thank you. And we would love to talk more about all of those things. I will ask you one last question, as I asked Bruno as well. If you could ask the Commission, or if you could ask Europe to do one thing, what would it be?
Learn from vaccines and basically put in place advanced purchase agreements for treatment also.
Thank you. No, thank you very much indeed, Kim. So that brings us to the end of our 2 whistle-stop tours of small companies that are going into the future. And we're now going to move into our discussion panel, which looks at where we learn from this and where we want to go next. And in particular, from a sort of national perspective. So I'm going to ask all of our panel members to switch on their cameras, which is very nice. And you will see we have a really nice mix of national representation here. We put this panel together specifically to try and reflect different needs from the different geographies of Europe. As we said right at the beginning of this, whether those countries are large or small, what their development history is, what their industrial profile is like, because this really reflects what Europe is. And so when we start in a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panel members to introduce themselves. We have a series of questions to go through with them, and hopefully, technology willing, we will have a series of polls for you as the audience to add your expertise into the conversation as well. We're not betting all of our money on the polls, as they seem to be slightly exciting in whether they work or not, but hopefully they will be there. So if I can move to my next slide, please, Martina. This is a slide for which I will win no prizes at all, but I wanted to share with people the results of the surveys and really quick questionnaires that we put out to all of the participants before this meeting started. And we looked at asking them what their priorities were. So the really small graph on the left was from SurveyMonkey, and it asked people to look at what their top 3 priorities were. And you can see that the sectors that got the aspects that got the largest feedback were public and private investment, collaboration and partnership, the European research framework, and regulatory frameworks. So that's not really deviating from what we would expect to see there. And then we had a really fast and short survey on LinkedIn, which asked people to pick the top priority. And somewhat unsurprisingly, here we have agile regulatory frameworks, followed by investment, and then full value chain partnership, and then market access. So I think that's really good because it looks towards the business end of incentives and frameworks, in that if you can adapt the regulatory framework, you also help resolve earlier issues in the sort of investment and partnering aspect of biotech development as well. But what I will do now is ask Martina to switch the slides off so that we can focus on our panel in all of its glory, and I will ask each one to introduce themselves. So I will start with Agni, as we start with A, and just give us a short introduction to who you represent and why where Lithuania sits in the sits within the European geography.
Thank you, Claire, very much for introduction, and thank you, EuropaBio, for inviting to join this panel. I think that's very important discussions that we're having today, and all the talks that and topics that we will discuss as well. So I represent Lithuanian Biotechnology Association, which is a national association connecting industry and academia in the country. And Lithuanian biotechnology sector is considered to be one of the fastest growing in Europe, and it continues to grow even faster. If we're looking at the last year, the pandemic year, I think each country has the same experience that the growth increased significantly. However, people that work in the industry, entrepreneurs and scientists, they think that in Lithuania, the future growth should be even faster. It could be even faster, specifically when we look at the challenges we learned from the pandemic, and as well as the Green Deal that is set up in EU, and as well the funding coming from EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. So it could become even a big incentive for rapid growth of Lithuanian Biotechnology Center. Lithuanian government has set up a goal as a priority life science sector, and we hope that it will keep growing. However, the strategy for how to reach the goal for growing, it's not there yet. So I think that in nationally wise, we really need a very specific strategy, a very clear investment into innovations. As mentioned today, with Portuguese example, that we also do not have VCs specifically for life science. So all that, I think we relate very much to like a small country problems that we have, which includes a very big necessity for partnerships and collaborations within European Union and outside to build this growth. I could go on further and further, but I think I have a limited time, so sorry for taking a bit longer. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Agni. And we will be able to speak about these things all the way through the panel discussion this afternoon. So I will swap round to the next person on my screen, who is Simeo. And we've already heard a little bit from David on the Portuguese perspective, but it would be really nice for you to reintroduce where Portugal sits in its priorities for the panel discussion.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. First, thank you, Claire, for challenging us to organize this event with you. So I'm the president of PBio, but I'm also CEO of Silico Life, a company that combines AI and biology and applies this to industrial biotech applications. And I think it's also important to have in mind that biotechnology is not just vaccines or just health applications, and we should also think behind vaccines, as we have in the title of this event. And in the last year, we saw a disruption of different supply chains, and we saw that there is a need to have also some geo strategy in place when we talk about manufacturing and not just for health applications, but for other goods. And at the same time, in the core of the European strategy, we have health and sustainability goals. And to achieve them, for sure, biotechnology is very important and requirement to do that. So as our minister said, at PBio, we tried to be a bit provocative. And in the past year, we also saw lots of discussions in terms of funding. And I think it's also important to understand the Portuguese context. As most of you know, we entered the European Union or the European Community at that time in '86. And in all the past decades, there was a very important investment that was used mainly to create new infrastructure and also to let's say, solve some societal issues. But now it's also important to understand that the recovery plan, together with this framework 2020-2030, this will be, let's say, the last big package coming from Brussels. And this is the last opportunity to really change our economy. So it's a pivotal moment for the Portuguese economy. So we need to understand how can we really build a strong economy based on knowledge. At the same time, work together with the rest of Europe. So we have industrialization agenda. We should also contribute to that. And biotech can and should have an important role in our national strategy. So for sure, we want to be involved in the industrialization efforts, but we want to work on markets and products with high margins that rely on highly qualified people, and that can also help us to develop our society. So what David showed today, it was the result of a year of discussion. So I think it was in March that we decided to use COVID as like a flag to talk with our government officials and to other, let's say, key organizations in our society, to tell them that biotechnology is central, starting with health as a good example. But I think most of the things that we talked in that BioHealthy 2030 strategy can be also used in other applications of biotechnology, on agriculture, on renewables, also on new food. And as we listen from other speakers today, it's really important to have the collaboration between academia, small startup companies or small tech companies, and then large companies. So these three type of entities together, working together. And to do that, so in this plan, we basically said that we should have a strong bet on biotechnology, covering some issues in basic research, solving problems that we have in terms of tech transfer, and having critical mass to do that in a correct way. Create conditions to this, what we call deep tech companies. So it's very different to consider a company that will probably not sell anything during its lifetime with, let's say, a low-tech business that is more on services and is selling from its first day. And then combining this with industrialization efforts. And here I'm repeating myself, but I think it's really important that, especially for small countries, that our industrialization agenda will also consider technological development. We need to also contribute with technologies that will be, let's say, industrialized. We should not be just, let's say, clients from other economies and buying machines and technologies to create factories here. We really need to also develop knowledge and, let's say, scale it here. And for now, I think it's a good summary of what I would like to talk today. Thank you again, Claire.
Oh, thanks, Emilio. That's great. So let's move across to France now, because this is a country that sits very differently than Lithuania and Portugal in terms of size, in terms of history within the European Union. So, Chloe, do you want to just introduce French biotech aspirations and where you sit and the priorities that you see going forward?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Claire, for this opportunity. So my name is Chloe Evans, and I'm in charge of market research and international affairs at France Biotech. And so France Biotech, with the French National Association for Biotech and Health Tech Companies. So I guess when you think about health tech, about biotech, when it comes to priorities for France, well, there's always the funding question, which is key. Particularly late-stage funding. We've seen quite a large number of small companies arise through the years, and I think now the real issue is to try to make sure that these companies have the right funding to go through the last phases, and perhaps for some of them try to go to market on their own. Sometimes it's interesting also to view that and to try and anticipate that. And for others, of course, to do collaborations with industry. So yeah, making sure that there are the right late-stage funds, I think, is one key priority. Trying to attract investments and private equity. Another key issue, which we have been focusing on as well, is technology transfer. So it's been mentioned earlier, but yeah, we think that this is one of the major issues. As you know, it takes time to develop biotech products, so it's important to be extremely quick when it comes to transferring the technology, to try and make sure to accelerate and to smooth that process is really key. And a lot of the collaboration is done internationally as well. So a lot of French biotech are very keen on developing partnerships with universities everywhere in Europe and in the world. So that's another key aspect and strength, I think, of Europe. Another issue which has become quite prominent lately is the manufacturing issue, especially biomanufacturing. So France has been focusing the last few years on trying to develop a strong industrial strategy, and government is really willing to invest, particularly in biomanufacturing. And I think the current crisis has also underlines, the fact that governments are quite keen and perhaps a little bit, let's just say they want to make sure that the countries have the right capacities for manufacturing and to ensure a certain sovereignty. So I think the French government at the moment is trying to find the right balance between manufacturing in France, especially for biologics, but also on imports. And we know that this is a very complex manufacturing chain, biotech. And we believe that it's also an opportunity for European players perhaps to come together and to reinforce the strength of producing biologics. I think a lot of countries have different skills and perhaps specialties, and it would be interesting to think about it globally and perhaps to think of this issue rather than being on national front, which is very tempting, but perhaps to see whether there could be some potential synergies with other European countries. So that's another point we're studying quite closely. And of course, market access is also an important issue. And what we're trying to do is trying to understand and how can we ensure that the payers and the evaluators are perhaps integrated earlier in the discussion, in the development process of especially for treatments, because we notice that technologies are quite often pushed by innovators, but rarely derive from direct needs from the payers and the evaluators, which makes the market access of tech quite difficult. So it's really to try and prepare them to anticipate this innovation and trying to embrace it and help companies through the process, perhaps through specific fast tracks when it covers particularly unmet needs. So these are the key issues, and of course, keeping on all the collaborations and partnerships, which are really key for this sector. And making sure that a lot of the partnerships are international as well. So trying to keep the right frameworks and the right environment to carry on with these partnerships.
No, thank you very much indeed, Chloe. And I think you raised lots of points that we will be discussing. And of course, a lot of things come back to the regulatory framework and the fact that Europe often feels like it's pushing stuff forwards rather than pulling it from the market, which of course takes a lot of effort and money to push things forward, especially if they are then just going to stall at the next stage as well. So I would like to go to our last panel member today, and we specifically have Norway in here because obviously Norway is not a member of the EU, but it's in very close partnership, with everything that we do. Is involved in all things EU on a daily basis, often completely indistinguishable from EU members. So it's really great, Henriette, if you could bring the Norwegian position in terms of your national development priorities.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you for the opportunity to join the panel as well. I'm Mohammad Christensen. I'm the head of the Life Science Cluster in Norway. We are a national cluster with more than 90 members across both large and small companies, academic institutions, universities, hospitals, institute sector, which is quite strong in Norway, and also investors. And we are a non-profit organization. And as you say, we are not an EU member, but an associated member. So in almost all practical matters, we are as an internal member. But we have definitely seen now through the Corona situation where the boundaries actually are on certain important cases. So as one example, we saw in the early stages of the pandemic, masks and other security equipment was flew in and shipped via Stockholm, which is our neighbor country and a close sibling, and the border has been almost what should I say, very open at least. But now all of a sudden the border between Sweden and Norway was the outskirts of the EU. And when the masks that were flown into the EU had landed in Stockholm, they couldn't actually be shipped out because there was an order not to ship security equipment out of the EU. Of course, it worked out, but it took a few extra days, which was very critical at the time. In other areas, in the beginning of the pandemic, we also are in very close collaboration with the EU. For example, coming to availability of vaccines for the population. And of course, that's a very difficult situation as a small country to be negotiating country per country. So that's an area where we have had a great advantage of being a semi member of the Union in certain areas. We also have seen that the Norwegian government has initiated some investigations, which are actually quite similar to the HERA, Health Emergency Response Authority, work going on in the EU. And I'm quite sure that much of the same is also going on very many other places, both country inside EU, but and also elsewhere. And again, I think this is definitely something that we would all gain from discussing openly between each other, because it's no point sitting and inventing the same solutions one by one. We are also a lab science cluster, not only concerning health, but also across industry silos, so also marine sector, which is very strong in Norway, the agri sector, and also industrial life sciences. And now also with sector convergency, we see that there's a lot of benefits of being cross technology, across industry cluster from our side. Yeah, so I think that's an introduction to us also. So as the others also say, both collaboration and knowledge exchange is very important also in our community to help develop new solutions.
No, thank you very much indeed, Henriette. And you raise really interesting points that were reinforced by both Pfizer and Novartis about what happens when when exports are impacted. The consequences are often not what people wanted to see. They looked at protecting vaccine supplies, but what they did is massively disrupt lots of other things as well. So let's jump in straight away to our first question, because we could actually talk about this probably for a month, but we will start with the hardest subject of all, and that, of course, is structural funds. In the discussion document that we used to underpin this meeting, we saw that it was nominated by our Spanish member, Eusebio, that structural funds were revised several times through the COVID response to allow national investment into different types of companies on a more sort of emergency basis. And as Eusebio said, it was actually revised 3 times. And one of the things it specifically mentioned was the ability to fund what you would call organizations or undertakings in difficulties. And biotech companies always fall into this category because they never make any money until late on in their day. So they would be considered the same as a financially fragile company, which often takes them out of the context of structural fund eligibility. And this changes significantly across countries as well, because it's down to the national interpretation of structural fund rules as to what falls in and what falls out of this. So I would like to ask Simeo first, from Portugal, how you would perceive structural funds to be important for your continued growth. And before you answer, I'm going to ask Martina to put on our first poll to see if it works, because that is specifically about structural funds. So while you answer, hopefully Martina will put the poll up.
Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned before, so structural funds, I think they are a very important topic to all of us, and also especially to smaller countries. And let's say my first message here for government officials or to the persons in charge of managing these funds is to listen to the companies. They know what they want, and they have identified the problems. We saw that in the previous presentations. Small companies and large companies, they were very, very, very quickly to answer what they would change. From the Portuguese perspective, I have to say one thing: it's really important to have less bureaucracy. So these funds, they will have to be executed in a very short time frame. So it's really important that we are able to efficiently use them. And at the same time, I think it's important to understand that biotechnology has its own specificities. Different development times, different types of milestones. So I think it's really important that the mechanisms that will be used then to, let's say, to move those funds towards the companies, that they understand how the development pipeline is actually functioning. For instance, one comment that we receive from our associates, a very common one, is when we talk about subcontracting. So a small company for sure will have to subcontract. For instance, when we talk about clinical trials or other studies, that will be very important to other aspects that we need to discuss later, to have something that can be used to create a collaboration. But to do that, we need to do our own homework, and we need to use these funds to do that. And we need to be able to use that money also to subcontract experts that can do that work in a very efficient way. And for sure, the money will be much well spent than if these small companies are forced to only use that internally. And also together with these structural funds, I think it's important to at the same time create a kind of regulatory sandbox. So if the countries are funding specific companies at the same time, they are putting these companies in a let's say a special regulatory sandbox so that they can more efficiently use that money and at the same time talk with the regulatory bodies and move forward.
I guess it would be particularly what we need to think about for Europe as well is the fact that we want to operate as a single market. So if you've got companies working in the same regulatory areas using structural funds, the economy, the speed and the economy of knowledge and critical mass of knowledge should be leveraged, but across different companies receiving structural funds.
And I think it's also important. So all these discussions of structural funds, if we have a look at them, they are happening in silos. So I only know about the Portuguese discussion, and I don't know what they are planning in Lithuania, for instance. And I think it's important because especially for small economies like ours, we always need to think that Europe is our home market. All the companies that we have in the biotech or life science space, they don't make sense if we just talk about Portugal. We really believe that Portugal is a competitive place to do research and development and to do innovation, but then these innovations, they can only make sense if we consider that our home market is the European market. So it's important to have here a fair space and understand and have the same conditions across Europe. And I think that will be also important to then foster collaborations that are not so natural. So we have lots of collaborations more in Central Europe. It could be interesting to see more collaborations happening, for instance, between the Nordics and South Europe.
Thanks very much, Simeo. And I think I'm going to ask Martina to hopefully show the results of the poll, if it's worked okay. Oh, good. So that's great. While Agni, I want to come to you really quickly. Simeo suggested, changing, allowing companies keeping them out of silos, so more European countries can see what is happening with companies receiving structural funds. Would that help also in Lithuania?
I think that visibility is not something that is essential from our side. Everyone is sharing everything they're doing. Actually, I think that's the general system where you can find. Yes, it needs to be built in. But I agree with what Simona said about documentation load and subcontracting, as well as some services, for instance, related to scientific advice, for instance, that's provided by regulatory agencies or something similar to that. However, we have a problem that is related to moving technologies to the market by using these structural funds. So it stops at some stage of development, usually because either the funds are way too low, for instance, for biotech technology to be developed until the end stage, or for instance, it kills during the process, and they're still going on because it has specific requirements. They have specific needs to finish just because of how the funds are made up. But we were discussing between the members that it might be wise to use some of other countries' experience as setting up like a stage gate where you evaluate progress of the project, and if it's moving forward, you continue funding. But if it is definitely not going forward, which is really common for any technology development, that it wouldn't have any potential to move forward, it would be stopped, and this is how it could be either modified or something like that. I don't know, and go through another evaluation, and it would be more reasonable to go forward, as well as considering the size of the funding. Maybe it could be even a bigger, considering the specificity of our sector, to put it to the market, because a lot of our products are not going technologies to the late stages. specifically the ones that, for instance, pharma industry is not interested too much. And so how to move for SME to move these to the market, it might be very complicated and difficult.
No, I think that's really good. And the poll that we showed that from the answers that we got, the winning thing was to revise the frameworks to reflect more advanced tech companies. And I think that's not a huge surprise to anybody, but we will definitely work on that. I'm going to move to the next question now, because although we could talk about that all day, let's not. But let's stay with money, because money is never very far away from the discussion, and not necessarily R&D money support through grants, but loans, equity, and other mechanisms. And this is from both private and public sources. And this is not a new story. Europe has improved with its investment levels, but it still lags behind other places, which means that our technologies are progressing more slowly in comparison to competing territories. So public funds have really stepped in, but can they do more? And what do we do to stimulate private money to get it to places where it doesn't currently reach? And I want to go to Chloe with this one.
Sure. Yeah, as you said, Claire, I mean, of course, funding is really key. And, the biotech industry is a high capital expenditure industry, a strong competition. So it's, of course, important to have the right funding to go, through the clinical phases. When we talk about healthcare products, or to go through the prototyping and industrialization for industrial biotech. And it's perhaps seen as a high-risk industry as well, high risk, but also high rewards. And I think it's important to think about it from the investor side, I guess, and trying to see how we can secure the funding as much as we can, and how we can secure the process, and perhaps that. We've seen recently some different initiatives and a particular change, which we really welcomed, particularly with the European Commission developing the EIC fund, over 3 billion, and we think that's very interesting. And we know the US US investors are particularly proactive in looking at a European biotech, and the biotech are welcoming investors because they have the money. But this IEC is quite interesting because the European Commission is really not only a stakeholder, but also becoming a shareholder in the companies, and we think that sends a very strong signal for private investors to follow up. So it's very positive, and it really helps attract private investors by securing and giving the right environment to attract European investors. So we think that's a very interesting initiative and should really be reinforced. And also perhaps by it's also seen as risky because there's not a lot of visibility on the market access. So we also think that's a key issue. If we can really secure that particular process as much as we can and reassure those investors. There were talks earlier about prepayments and purchasing. So that also is quite interesting, not just from an industrial point of view, but also from a financial point of view, we think. Trying to make European companies attractive, trying to find the right environment for these investments to be made, and to try and attract capital and try and de-risk the industry, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're hitting all the right words there, really, in terms of both it's de-risking and incentivize investment from private sector, and the public sector is playing a role by stepping in there already, which I think is really important. And I want to encourage people in the audience to also drop things in the chat function where we're not running a poll, because your opinions in here are really important as well. And so I think, Chloe, I'm going to take from that you have not only the de-risking in terms of the Commission acting as a public investor in a company, but also the necessity of looking at market access. And I would add to that as well the intellectual property discussion as well that Sinan mentioned earlier, in that without confidence, investment is not going to come. So the confidence of market access, the confidence of long-term ability to recoup your investment is super important. But I'm going to skip on as well, because I really want to get through a number of our questions in the time that we have. So I want to skip over to a regulatory side of that, because it is closely linked to incentivizing investment. And I'm going to start with Hanna Mette here, because although Norway is outside the EU directly, it's bound by pretty much all of the same regulatory framework. So it's going to have the same bottleneck or rate limiting step of investment linked to regulatory perceptions. And at the same time, I'm going to ask Martina to put on our poll number 2 around the regulatory aspects, because I think this is such an important topic. So this is regulatory is a pull factor. You know, nobody disputes Europe's position on safe products for citizens, you know, and trust is absolutely key. As we said, we see this with food, or we see this with vaccines. But the longer and more complex the route to market is, the fewer projects are going to be feasible, especially from small companies. So Hanna Mette, I start with you, and then I will go to Egni and Chloe. How can European regulatory frameworks enable faster and more accessible pathways to market?
Yeah, there are many answers to that I would get. But
yes.
I would like to draw a parallel now to the kind of comic side digitalization agent question that has circulated. Who is the digitalization agent of your company? Is it the CEO, the CTO, or COVID? And I think that the development of both vaccines, therapeutics, also diagnostics and other goods also are now the development process is speed transformed by COVID. So now through the vaccine development, we see what is actually possible when we have to. And my dream, of course, is that, which is shared by, I'm sure, everybody in this room, is that we can learn from this also post-COVID and take those transformations into the regular development of new products. And when we are thinking about personalized therapeutics and how we see that we're moving from large blockbuster indications down to practically, it's possible technically to develop drugs per patient. But we need to find new and more efficient ways of developing drugs, and also new and more efficient ways of producing drugs. Because how can you do long-term stability studies of batches when you have one patient who needs your drug 2 weeks from now? So I think also many of these learnings that we have been forced to get now through COVID can help us in the transformation to those non-pandemic challenges that are ahead of us. And I also actually think that those speed transformations that have been forced upon us will also actually speed up the transition to a more sustainability, documentable process. Because now we also have been a lot more aware of all the different sources that are in layers behind our primary sources. And when we are forced to dig up where your supplies actually comes from, we also can start documenting that in a much better way than has been done previously. So yeah, those are two different elements at least, and there are many more, of course.
No, that's really interesting, thank you. And I know this is something we could talk about probably for a whole month without stopping. But I'm going to ask Martina now to end our poll before I go to Egni. And we have... It's kind of similar, but most people think that everything should be changed, not just better, more flexible, not just faster for SMEs, not just stronger regulatory development, but basically there are lots of different aspects that need to be developed through that need to be improved on the regulatory side of things for advanced therapeutics and materials. So Agni, from Lithuania's perspective as well, what is going to help your early stage companies get through faster in a regulatory perspective? Where do they see the problems?
Okay, so I think that the general thing, like EU has the most strictest regulation in the world, so that has to adapt and change. But I'm not going to go too deep on that. I'm going to talk about from technological point of view, because in Lithuania we do have a very niche technologies developed here, and you can very clearly see that regulations are really behind the technologies. Which, for instance, let's take exosome-based technologies or nanotechnologies, or even gene engineering, gene therapy. In some cases, there is not enough something that is not regulated, considered forbidden or not welcome at all to the market. So that stops the development in general of any advanced technologies. So I think that's something to be considered, and we talk with our national regulators a lot on that, just to keep up with what's happening. But of course, it's European issue, and I think that's really behind to what is going on in the industry. And then you have to catch up, and as I mentioned, push rather than it's happening from other side. The other thing that I wanted to mention, that it is very diverse in the European Union within the EU member countries are related in relations to regulatory frameworks. And for instance, in ATMP or others, it's just different countries have different approaches to this, and it's important to have probably more count. But that's a topic that also been discussed with the regulatory institutions. And the last one that I wanted to mention is, in any case, the reimbursement also touches the regulatory in each country, and that's one of the key things why most of the technologies don't go further, because, for instance, some of them are expensive, effective, but not profitable, and the need of the patient is not met at the point of economic counting. So that's not also a good, I think, approach. And the reimbursement should be evaluated specifically on these advanced technologies.
No, thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to invite Martina to put our next poll up, which is a slightly harder question. I'm really sorry, which talks about what national regulatory agencies could be doing as well. How do we align what national regulatory agencies plus the European Medicines Agency and other, in other sectors as well? How do we make this more streamlined? And I'm really aware that this might be a very difficult one to answer for people, but I'll go back finally to Chloe on the regulatory side. And where would you like to see regulatory frameworks across different sectors responding to biotechnology advances?
Yes, well, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's quite a big topic. But we've seen in last year that everything can go fast. We've seen that speed is possible when there's an emergency, and there's a lot of solidarity and a lot of work between countries, between agencies to really accelerate things. So we know it's possible. It's also shown that administrative barriers can also be overcome, and it's important to keep in mind, of course, that we do need the right regulation. We, especially Europe, is known for having quite a tough regulation, but it's also what ensures quality. What I think is important, it would be to try and anticipate future needs as well, from a European point of view, perhaps with the HERA agency. To try and to understand unmet medical needs, for example, when it comes to healthcare, and to try to be a little bit more proactive and anticipate the needs in order to be able to act in a coordinated way. And that can perhaps be established through fast tracks for particular medicines. We've seen that, we anticipate that antibiotic resistance, for instance, will be key, will become a real problem in a few years. So if it's, it's now that we should act. And antibiotic resistance, I'm using that example, but it's got a bit of a difficult business model as prices are very low, but that shouldn't stop research from functioning. So I think there's a lot of changes that can be done. I don't think a total change of the regulation is necessary. I think we should focus on where the unmet needs are, and to try and make the process as clear and understandable, with being to try and accelerate it in a way, but without changing the quality of the products that come out.
No, thank you very much. And we had a question in through from Klaus, and I'm just going to read it out because only the panelists can see it rather than the whole audience. And it talks about open discussion and flexible regulatory approach on a national and EU level are very important to push development faster. We've already some fast track regulations which are not actually bad and comparable to the US, but what we experienced here is that early on institutions in the EU and Germany have been quite slow or lazy to react to innovative technologies, whereas other companies have already put them on a fast track development program. So it sounds like Europe is starting to put the right things in place, but we all need to be much more proactive in how we use them and how we support them. So I'm going to ask Martina to show us the results of the next poll to see if anybody had any contributions around how national regulatory agencies work. Let me see if we can get the answers of that. I'm not sure we have many answers to that, so I'm not going to go on it for too long, because again, it somewhat requires expert knowledge of regulatory systems at national level as well. So I want to move now on to collaboration, and this is particularly important for smaller countries because they lack the critical mass of population scale, to really build up a sort of gravitational pull, and they also may lack the economic firepower to be active internationally. So this really is for a quick one for Agni and Simeo first, as to what smaller countries need to be visible and active in Europe. So we'll start with Simeo, but you've got like 30 seconds for this, Simeo.
So I will connect this to the previous discussion. I think collaboration is key, not just between different countries, but also different kinds of entities. And I think it's really important to have an open collaboration between tech companies and the national regulatory bodies. So having, let's say, having them more open to talk about the regulatory issues, to be, let's say, quicker in giving their feedback, in being less conservative and being more open to share their thoughts, even if their decision is not final. But I think that is very important, because it's one of the problems that the companies that they have, that sometimes they are not addressing regulatory issues until they are in a very late stage. And when they face problems there, it's very difficult to solve. So I think it's important to also promote collaborations that are not as typical as others. And getting back to the original question, I think for smaller countries, it's really important to have in mind that we need to collaborate with others. We had here some thoughts shared by Pfizer and how they interact with BioNTech, and I think if in Germany it was needed for BioNTech to partner with Pfizer, for sure in other countries it's really important to have this kind of partnerships. And again, to be able to do that, we need to first create relations, we need to create trust, we need to show that we are doing also our own work and that we have interesting things that we can also bring to this collaboration, that we have interesting technology, that we have very efficient ways of developing new drugs, new products, and that it makes sense for a big company to also work with small companies that can be also in Portugal. And I think in the end of that intervention, the person from Pfizer said that we need more BioNTechs, and for sure we need that, and we need to create conditions to also have them coming from different countries in Europe.
No, thank you very much. Before we switch over to Agni, I'm going to ask Martina to put up our next quick poll, which is really going to ask people what they see is missing from the collaborative landscape. Is it the regulators? Is it the healthcare systems? Is it manufacturers? What do we see as missing? Because there's lots of things that do facilitate collaboration in Europe, but where are we seeing key gaps there that we need to fix? But Agni, what works? What are your priorities in terms to enable you guys to collaborate better and more impactfully?
Well, I think that there are two sides, so we have to be more proactive as well, and be more inclusive, and be more visible, and show what value we can add to as a partner, as a collaborator. However, from the other side, well, Lithuania is a bit on the other side. We are not that much visible, and this is, I think, really underrated. And we do have world-class scientists in specific fields and niche fields, a very advanced fields as well. Not just in biotechnology, but also in IT, engineering, and lasers, which is very beneficial for connection of technologies and creating products or technologies that combines these different sectors and different knowledges. So I think that it's as Samara mentioned, I think that's what Portugal is saying. It's very, very similar to Lithuania. It's just that we are in a colder place, but in general, it's very similar. So I wouldn't go any further, but yes, collaboration and being more active and showing that the value that we can add is very important. And thank you, EuropaBio, for helping us do that.
No, it's what we do, so that's fine. I'm going to move on to the next question now. It stays within a collaborative framework, and I'll start with Henrietta, because we're talking about HERA gets mentioned a lot these days. So the preparedness framework that the European Commission is setting up, and this seems to support aligned national efforts in healthcare. So is this something that you would see as positive also for Norway to be involved with, and how could we develop this for other sectors as well? So Henrietta, tell us how you do with Norway, and I will also ask Martina to put up quickly poll number. Oh no, we haven't finished poll number 4. Sorry, I'm terribly sorry. If we could close poll 4 and open poll 5, that would be really helpful. Okay, so Henrietta, I come back to you. How are EU frameworks like HERA going to be more useful to Norway as well, and how do you think you should be involved in that?
In the Nordics, we have always had a very strong collaboration across country and cross region, and we still do and still discuss different solutions and different ways of trying to solve these large questions that have come upon us now. And we see that a lot of those discussions that go on country by country are also very similar to the HERA discussions. And also some of the challenges are a lot larger than those that can be solved country by country. And that is both for contingency production of drugs and also accessibility to vaccines. So having a joint way of working to solve this is increasingly important, I think. And what we also have seen is that when the governments, in a pandemic, they're actually allowed to go in and fund purchasing of supplies under a crisis. So of course, if you're actually interested in something that is long-term, you can't use that kind of funding. So probably the governments need to both find new ways of doing things and apply to the governmental regulations on support to industry. Because if you want contingency for preparedness, it needs to last between pandemics. You can't establish a factory on the occurrence of the next pandemic. You need to have hopefully at least we are more prepared than we were this time. But that's also tricky. So for the countries and EU to work together on how to understand the frameworks for industrial support. So there must be more industry governmental support, as has been pointed to in both the earlier presentations and also in this panel discussion, and how that is actually done. So everybody agree there will be and needs to be more governmental industry collaboration, but then under what kind of frameworks is that actually possible, and how can we make it last between pandemics, to put it that way? That's actually more tricky and cannot be solved country by country.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I'll ask Martina to close our poll now just to see where we should do things internationally. And again, there is support for it to be fully open, an organisation such as HERA. So it should not just be EU only, it should not be EU partially open on partial topics, but it should be fully open and part of a global effort, which I think is very good to hear. Hannah-Mette, I really liked your question. The answer to your question, I think, is relevant for everybody. So with an eye on the time, I'm actually going to move to the next question so that we can get more panelists to answer those as well. And so our next topic is the research funding. I mean, we already do a great job in Europe on research funding. It's long term, it's deep. You've got really strong structures such as ERC. So for me, it's never been the origination of knowledge that is a problem for Europe. It's how that knowledge has progressed further. So I would like to ask Chloe here how Europe can ensure stronger flow of innovation through research and SMEs and into mature and market-ready positions. Because really moving away from the base R&D to how we actually make this flow more effectively through to its target market.
Yes, no, I think the funding, research funding, R&D in the earlier stages is quite effective. I think there are interesting instruments. European funding, for example, is very active when it comes to early research. There's a lot of collaborations which are funded through the different schemes, through different European schemes. But then I guess European companies have difficulties scaling up. So actually going from a startup status to something to developing and hiring even more even people and developing products. So I mentioned earlier the fact that the EIC fund was a very interesting idea with a direct capital equity invested in companies. I think that's an interesting an interesting option. I think it's also about seeing it as a bit of an issue of European sovereignty in those companies, because a lot of the companies are, I guess it's part of the market, but are also attracting US investors, and that's fair. But it's also about making sure that Europe has the right large companies in the years to come to be able to keep, to avoid small companies being bought by larger ones. So I think it's also important to keep that liberalism, but also ensure that we have strong companies on the continent, and that is I guess is the case for healthcare, is the case for industrial biotech or agricultural biotech. And I think one of the advantages, I guess, of Europe is that free movement really allows researchers and company executives to travel quite easily through the continent. There's a lot of, universities are very open to having skilled, researchers. There's a lot of exchange there, and there's a lot of, international exchange, even between academia and private companies. And I think if Europe has to invest somewhere, is to trying to make sure that all the talents and all the skilled workforce keeps flowing, because we believe it's really beneficial for all the companies and future collaborations as well. So it goes through the people. Of course, there's importance in investing in infrastructure, in investing in the capital of companies, but also thinking about the people who make up those companies.
No, thanks very much. And I'm going to ask Martina to put on our next poll quickly to capture our audience feedback before I also ask Simeo, from a Portuguese perspective, where do you see the critical need to help, for research funding to help innovation flow?
Yes, I think we have some let's say some good funding for research, especially the one coming directly from Europe. I think it's important to, let's say, adjust some of the incentives. I think it's important to have long-term priorities independent from political cycles. I think it's important to adjust some of these funding programs to biotech. For instance, having a scheme that if you are able to achieve a certain milestone, the next part of your funding will be easily made available. Now currently is the opposite. We have the companies and the researchers trying to fit their research into the available or to the existing schemes. And I think it's also important to here on the incentive side, if we want really to move from research to market, that should be let's say foster the leadership of small tech companies in these research projects. So having this triangle of academia, small tech companies, and then large companies, I think it's extremely important to speed up these tech transfer issues. And I think it's important also to identify some funding gaps. For sure, one is clear, is the one that when we are at a later stage and we need more money. But I think sometimes, especially I think I'm talking about the Portuguese context, we are seeing a gap between, let's say, the research that is quite interesting and resulted in a patent and having enough to start a company. And because of this, sometimes we are seeing companies starting before they should start, because there is no really scheme for proof of concepts and saying, if you are doing great research, then you have access to this proof of concept grant that you don't need to worry about research, but you can use that to really have what is required before starting a company.
No, I think that's a great point. And Europe's always been prone to having a lot of very early stage companies, almost like pre-companies. And the numbers do get talked a lot about by the European Commission. But of course, a startup is not the end of the journey. It's just the beginning. So the product is the end of the journey. So Europe falls in the same hole there.
I just have to mention one aspect here that is, let's say, related to the Portuguese context. It's always much more interesting to try to get funding directly from the European Commission in terms of amounts and also how it is easier to execute, while in the national funds they also have a huge bureaucracy and funds that are only for academic researchers. We are seeing there lots of people applying, but not enough money to be able to fund the excellent projects. And that is for sure something that needs to be changed.
Well, that's a delightful note at which I will end this discussion panel so far, in that sometimes EU funding has less bureaucracy than national funding, which is not something we hear very often, and I'm very happy. So I'm going to ask Martina to end our last poll. And the winner for where we wanted to see where more money should be put in is the later stage big ticket items like the manufacturing scale up. So that is very helpful to also collect as well. So I am going to thank our panel very much, because I have really made you run really fast through a lot of panel discussion questions, but they're really helpful for us to help build the reporting that we will do after this event and the development of our National Association Council's position from our first summit, and as well as the really excellent comments and some of the Q&As that we've had in from our participants as well. So I'm going to ask Martina now to put our their slides back on so I can wrap up our summit, because everybody's worked very hard and has earned whatever happens after work today. So if you could put the slides back on, Martina, that would be really super. So I will say a big thank you to all of our speakers and all of our national associations, because they were all involved in the development of the format behind this, and they all came to the meeting today. Our wider members, I would really like to thank in EuropaBio, because I've seen a lot of people outside our national associations attending today, and their contributions are incredibly valuable. And of course to you, our wider audience, if you're not already a EuropaBio member, we were really pleased that you could take part today and help build up our knowledge level to bring into recommendations. So our next steps here is we will share the slides from today and the recording from everybody that was registered for the meeting, and prepare our draft summit recommendations. Our National Associations Council will work on that. If we could just go back one, Martina, that would be really helpful. Our national associations will finalise the document that we will publish, and we will make sure as many people read it as possible, because it will underpin our future National Association Council activities. And we will start looking forward to our next presidency summit in 2022, not 2021. My calendar let me down there. So we can look back and go, we can report on the progress from this year and look at how we then modify our recommendations to go further. So I thank you, and we move on to our next slide. And if you haven't had enough punishment already from being very good at sitting through all of our summit today and taking part, we have got a lot of things coming up that you should be part of, most of which are open to non-members. So when you receive the slides, these events will be hyperlinked, and you can take part in everything except the Patient Bioforum event, which is very much members and invite only. So our next slide. I want to say thank you very much on behalf of EuropaBio as a whole. And you'll see, you may know already, that we do a lot of different things across our three main councils. So we have our Healthcare and our Industrial Biotech Council, as well as our National Associations Council. And we really work across the spectrum of biotechnology. So if you want to find out more about what we do and how you could be involved in the initiatives that we have, please just come and talk to me, and we will set up several mechanisms for you to use there. And then nearly our last slide will be, this is who we work with, and this is who you could work with as part of EuropaBio as well. So we are always expanding our family of members. Whether you're a small startup or a gigantic multinational, there's a lot of work for you to do inside EuropaBio. So I think that is my final slide. So I will ask our speakers to, if they haven't got their cameras on now, I will ask them to put their cameras on and get the slide taken down from Martina, so that we can have a final speakers thank you and farewell. So I would just say thank you very much. I realise I'm entirely sitting in the shade here, so I will be in big trouble when we come to take the photograph. Hopefully that makes it a bit better. Maybe block. It's too sunny here, which is not something that happens in Brussels very often. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. So I would like to thank you, all of our speakers, and you will get a lot of homework to wrap up after this as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much to all of our audience. And we will be in touch very shortly with the follow-up and the next steps from this. Thank you very much.